I'm Harrison Hurt, and I'll be doing the March 2017 PF topic analysis for the Champion Briefs. Before I dive into the content of today's video, make sure to get the Champion Briefs for an even greater depth of analysis than I could provide in 20 minutes, and lots of real great research and evidence. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dive right into the resolution we have for March this year, which is resolved: the United States should no longer pressure Israel to work toward a two-state solution. So before I delve into specific substantive stuff about this topic, I have a couple disclaimers that I want to get out of the way with. The first is that you have to realize that this topic is very personal for many people in this country and around the world. It is a highly contentious issue that has forced many people to draw a line in the sand, often taking an us versus them mentality. If you are not pro-Israel, some people believe that you have to be pro-Palestine, etc., often creating a binary between these two sides. Many of you all debating this topic may have your own strong opinions coming in, and that's respectable. However, I suggest that you keep an open mind and you try to take a very balanced approach when you're reading some of the topic literature and when you're discussing these things. For one, you should always be respectful about the topics that you're discussing in debate rounds, but you should especially be respectful about this topic because many people have very sincere and personal connections. And if you are one of those people yourself, you should recognize the importance of that and how other people with different experiences than you might also have personal experiences that are very important to them about this topic as well. For another, you will likely have judges that have strong personal biases on this topic, and you can't necessarily predict which way those biases run. I personally believe that the best way to overcome such biases is to take a narrative of argumentation that attempts to advance the positions of the entire region, a solution that is not just best for Palestinians alone or best for Israelis alone, but ones that's best for everyone. This might seem kind of idealistic, but taking this kind of stance is A, more respectful to both sides, B, the best way to avoid alienating biases, and C, even from a strategic perspective in debate, it offers more offense by giving you a wider scope of impact. I just don't see any consequences negatively that would occur from taking a more balanced approach, and I think that, personally, that's what I would suggest. Another disclaimer I have is some of you might know that Donald Trump basically announced this month that he would no longer pressure Israel towards a two-state solution. Some of you may be thinking, oh, does this mean that the topic's now over? And my answer to that is no, not at all. Because even if the resolution has been enacted through this Trump policy statement, that doesn't mean we can't debate whether such enactment will ultimately be positive or negative. Moreover, it will likely be too soon for debaters to see any of the effects of Trump's policy decision here by the time that tournaments roll around in March. Anything that does happen in Palestine will likely not be causally related to Trump's statement. But if you do want to somehow incorporate Trump's statement and relate it to recent events that occurred afterwards, you have to be very sure that the link is causal and not just correlation, and be able to provide very strong evidence to back that up. Don't just attach random daily developments to Trump's announcement. Find good evidence that specifically relates those events to Trump's announcement and explains the causal connection very, very well if you want to do this. Okay, so those are my major disclaimers out of the way. So now we're going to begin a more substantive discussion about this topic. So first of all, there is a lot of history behind the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which frankly I just don't have enough time to talk about in this video. But some subjects that you should research for background include all of the major Arab-Israeli wars, both of the major Palestinian intifadas, and especially the 1993/1995 Oslo Accords, which essentially established the current status quo of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and which runs Palestinian territories alongside the Palestinian Authority and Israel today. More recent developments include major peace talks in 2013 to 2014, which ended up failing to resolve most major issues. However, those talks were still very important, and you should still examine reasons why they failed, maybe to be able to advance any kind of position that you might take on this topic. Now, definitionally, this resolution might seem pretty straightforward, but there's actually a lot of complexity, in my opinion. For one, the two-state solution is a buzz term thrown around a lot when discussing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but many citizens and even some commentators don't truly understand what it entails. At the broadest sense possible, the two-state solution refers to a solution which calls for two states for two groups of people, recognizing a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. What kind of boundaries this two-state solution would entail is a huge source of controversy. So the status of settlements in the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula are all highly disputed, especially since much of that territory was territory that Israel gained in its 1967 war against Arab countries. And many of those Arab countries do not believe that its gains in such war were legitimate. And ultimately, that drives a lot of tension in this debate. Moreover, the status of Jerusalem itself, which both Palestinians and Israelis lay ancestral and spiritual claims over, is obviously very, very controversial and very central to this discussion. Moreover, recent settlement expansion by the Israeli government is questioning whether they actually have a legitimate desire for negotiating a two-state solution. And another difficulty still is the role that public opinion plays, the role that the government plays in deciding what this actually is going to look like in the real world. Another quirk to keep in mind about the wording of this resolution is that it is a negatively worded resolution. The pro team is the team against pressure for a two-state solution, whereas the con team is for pressure for a two-state solution. Typically, resolutions are positively phrased, which makes it easier to keep track of what both sides are really advocating for. Negatively worded resolutions like this one, at least that I've found, can throw kind of confusing wrench into the debate and can be especially confusing for judges unfamiliar with the topic who have difficulty keeping track of what each side is trying to say. So keep that in mind and always try to clarify your position as much as possible, especially at the beginning of the round, and that's how you can avoid any major difficulties with that. What I think is central to this debate, though, is defining what exactly is U.S. pressure on Israel for a two-state solution. How does it manifest in the real world? I think you're going to need to do a lot of research to uncover this and its impacts. Intuitively, I see pressure mostly as diplomatic pressure applied through communication, rhetoric, American foreign policy, soft power, etc. Somehow, pressure might be related to perhaps aid we give to Israel or other types of policies. But no matter how you define pressure, I think this is the most important and most extensive research that you'll need, and this is essentially the defining link of the resolution that we are being asked to discuss, and probably the most important. And I think that becomes evident when talking about the dynamics of how the debate itself might play out. So, for example, even if the two-state solution is not viable or very unlikely, con teams can still win the debate if they show that U.S. pressure for a two-state solution has positive impacts or externalities. Moreover, pro team, even if the con wins that the two-state solution is the best for both sides in the long run, that doesn't necessarily mean that they win the debate. They still have to prove that U.S. pressure for has a substantive impact on making such a two-state solution happen. If pro somehow proved, for example, that U.S. pressure actually decrease the likelihood of the two-state solution from happening, that would turn all of con's impacts against them. So I think no matter how you splice it, U.S. pressure is ultimately the center of the debate, is perhaps even more central than the two-state solution itself. I think, though, you can't necessarily totally detract the two-state solution out of the equation, because the way the resolution is worded suggests the only type of U.S. pressure that is sort of what this debate is about is pressure to work toward a two-state solution. So what that means, in other words, is that other applications of pressure that the U.S. uses on Israel for other kinds of foreign policy-related goals are not really topical to this debate, and you can't really garner impacts off of those. But U.S. pressure working toward a two-state solution is what is central to this discussion, and what the impact of that pressure is proceeds and is more important in some ways for at least what this debate is about than the impact of the two-state solution itself. So, with that in mind, what might actual arguments look like on this topic? So, I think there is a viable pro argument that U.S. pressure for a two-state solution might be overbearing and it might drive tensions in the United States-Israel alliance. This was a large criticism of the policies of Barack Obama and John Kerry, especially from a conservative perspective. Now, this kind of argument might seem like it lends itself to a more Israel-centric view of the conflict, but I think that even from a Palestinian perspective, it's bad to see damage done to the U.S.-Israeli alliance because the United States can moderate Israel in the long term and act as an effective mediator for both sides. But if the United States loses its good relationship with Israel, then the Palestinians lose out on a potential conflict mitigator or potential third party. A two-state solution might not even be possible if the United States is not on good terms with Israel. Moreover, the U.S.-Israeli alliance is extremely important for a host of other regional security issues, including combating terrorism, weapons proliferation, combating the influence of Iran, and beyond. So I think there's a lot of great impacts that could necessarily come from this argument and don't necessarily force you to take a stance that is pro-Israel or like pro-Israel to a point that is anti-Palestine, but essentially has impacts that matter for the entire region. I also think that there's a similar con argument to be made about how pressure on Israel for a two-state solution is necessary to maintain U.S. legitimacy, especially among regional actors. Arab states such as Egypt and Jordan, for example. These actors often believe that the United States has a propensity to allow Israel to get away with perceivably aggressive policies, such as its expansions of settlements in the West Bank. Pressure for a two-state solution is one of the only ways that the United States can maintain credibility in the region at large and show that they are not necessarily a blind supporter of all Israeli policy, but truly want what is best for everyone that's involved in the conflict. I think the impacts of this can also be very, very significant because United States credibility among these Arab states and partners in the Middle East is highly important from a wide range of security and foreign policy issues there, from combating ISIL to combating other threats in the region and so on. I think that you can also attempt to run arguments that impact out to the two-state solution itself on either side, and you could also necessarily run arguments talking about why the two-state solution is bad, which there is some literature on, or advocate for some alternatives to the two-state solution on the pro side. However, all of this essentially has to be linked through U.S. pressure some way or another, which is why I think there are a couple difficulties of running this kind of argument. For one, proving that U.S. pressure will lead to the two-state solution itself or somehow uniquely prevent it from happening is very, very difficult in my opinion. There are so many different factors that determine the success of the two-state solution, such as how borders are drawn, the openness of leadership on both sides to compromise, public opinion and sentiment, international legitimacy, and in that big grand scheme of things, United States pressure is just one piece of the puzzle, and whether it's there or not doesn't necessarily guarantee or throw away the success of the two-state solution. For another, taking a stance against the two-state solution or in favor of alternatives such as the one-state solution or some kind of three-state coalition involving regional actors, which has been suggested by some foreign policy commentators, is similarly difficult because even without U.S. pressure, I think it's difficult to give the probability for any of these alternatives for occurring. Even if we don't pressure Israel towards this policy, that doesn't necessarily mean that we start advocating for X policy, or doesn't mean that even if we start advocating for X policy, that will be any more likely or any more happening at all. So that's why I think that essentially impacting out to the two-state solution might be a mistake in of itself, and that might seem to some to be the intuitive approach of this resolution, to be advocating for or against the two-state solution itself. But when you look closely at how the resolution is worded, That's not really what is central to the debate. What's central to the debate is this discussion of United States pressure on Israel to work toward a two-state solution, and whether or not working toward whether or not getting that two-state solution is kind of a secondary question to this resolution. The real question of this resolution is, what is the role of U.S. involvement in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? How does our leverage/influence actually affect the real world in ways that are both intended and unintended? So I think that that's ultimately the kind of narrative that you want to be able to galvanize no matter what side of the debate you choose. I think that that kind of debate is going to be central to the discussion, and I think that a lot of teams are going to end up falling into traps when they go and just read a case that is entirely about the two-state solution being good or bad, or the one-state solution being better, etc., without ever establishing the link to United States pressure for a two-state solution in the first place. And so, with that in mind, essentially that's the strategic approach that I would lay out when approaching this topic. You can use either of the two arguments that I've just suggested, which both rely on a very broad definition of pressure, one that is not necessarily linked to specific policy, but is more linked to rhetoric. Or you could try to define pressure more specifically, as I suggested earlier, in terms of specific policy implementations, such as military aid or other kinds of aid that is given to Israel or lack thereof, maybe even some kind of trade-related definition of pressure. But you have to explain essentially why whatever form of pressure that you're describing is the form of pressure that is central to the discussion of the debate and is inherent to the discussion of the debate. How that pressure, and I think the way to do that is explain how this is the pressure that is uniquely linked to Israel working towards the two-state solution. You don't want to just run cases about pressure in general that the United States applies, because, again, that's just not really topical, and pressure that we apply for other reasons, absent our desire for a two-state solution, won't garner you any real impacts in this debate. So, basically, to sum everything up, I think that this is a highly complex topic that will be very difficult to debate, and also, frankly, a highly controversial one. But I think that it ultimately can be one that is very interesting as a question about the role of U.S. involvement in this area and the impacts that it might have. Overall, again, I really honestly encourage you to keep an open mind. Please be respectful of all sides. And I think that you'll learn a great deal about this topic. It's an extremely important issue, and rarely in public forum do we get an opportunity to discuss something that is just so important, so consequential, and continues to be so consequential, even after decades of rich history. This is one of those topics where having a lot of historical knowledge is definitely going to be something that launches you ahead. And that is going to be a major key in the debates that you're going to have on the many different tournaments on this topic. March is mostly a month, not with many national circuit tournaments, mostly, but still very important tournaments for many different states, with state championships, qualifiers for national title tournaments in the late spring and early summer. So I believe this is an important topic and an important month, and that you can gain a lot from debating it if you take the right approach, keep an open mind, and make sure to not shut off any possible opinions, and honestly just be as respectful as you can. And as always, make sure to go get the champion briefs for some even better analysis than I've given here and great high-quality research. So, once again, my name's Harrison Hurt, and thank you for watching this video. Hope it helped.